Please be seated. In the last part of today's gospel reading, Jesus sets up an unexpected hierarchy based upon one's compliance with the Jewish law and the writings of the prophets. To me, it sounds a little like airline boarding groups, but in this case, the plane is headed to the kingdom of heaven. First-class passengers, Group 1, are those who comply with every detail of the law, every jot and tittle, as the King James Version would have it, and teach others to do the same. Group 2, Economy, are those who break or set aside one or more of the jots and tittles and teach others to do the same. The last group, Standby, are the scribes and the Pharisees, and whoops, we've overbooked the flight. Please check with the ticket agent to see about your alternatives. Jesus doesn't mention the other levels of power and authority above the scribes and Pharisees, the high priests, the Herodian puppet rulers, and ultimately Caesar and his Roman legions. But either they don't fly commercial, or the airline they choose doesn't service the kingdom of heaven. The scribes and Pharisees were the official custodians of the law and prophets, which contained hundreds of commandments about great and small things, from what foods you could and couldn't eat to prohibitions against murder. They were very concerned about keeping things, at least on the surface, the same as they had been since Moses and David. These traditions were detailed, ancient, familiar, and therefore, in a way, comforting. This gave the people of Jesus' time a sense of continuity with the past glory of theocratic Israel and distracted them from the reality that the only law that really mattered in a practical, day-to-day sense emanated not from God, but from Rome. Isaiah, writing about 500 years before Jesus, is also trying to make sense of Jewish law in his context of powerful foreign adversaries who were chipping away at what was left of Israel bit by bit. Like Jesus, Isaiah focuses not on the external threat, but on the behavior of his people. He ridicules them in no uncertain terms for yoking or oppressing people less fortunate than they are: workers, the homeless, the poor, the afflicted, the naked, and the hungry. And after doing that, they expect God to listen and respond to their prayers and fasts. Isaiah very plainly says that our relationship to God is revealed by our relationship to others. Isaiah's solution: stop the oppression, and you will come back into alignment with God, and by extension, with the law. And more than that, your light shall break forth like the dawn. Isaiah is writing in the mode of afflict the comfortable, whereas Jesus, in this part of Matthew that we call the Sermon on the Mount, is in comfort the afflicted mode. We heard the beginning of the sermon last Sunday with the Beatitudes, which may, in fact, be the most comforting words in the entire Bible. In these words, he overturns or reframes the common understanding, privileging most, if not all, of the yoked people that Isaiah was talking about hundreds of years before. But he goes beyond Isaiah from the tangible to the spiritual. Not just the poor are blessed, but so are the poor in spirit. Not just the hungry, but those who hunger for righteousness. Today, in part 2 of the sermon, Jesus reminds the assembled crowd that none of this is in conflict with either the law or the prophets, but rather what he is saying is its fulfillment. For Jesus, the law exists to benefit the people of God. The people of God do not exist to serve the law. The Pharisees, scribes, and Jesus are all looking at the same law. But the Pharisees and the scribes are looking through the wrong end of the binoculars. The law is not distant and unapproachable. It's right here with us. And as today's psalm says, we should have great delight in God's commandments. If we don't, something's wrong. Observance of the commandments should not result in a well-behaved but subservient population. That's what the Romans had hoped to establish by setting up the Herodian system under imperial domination. Jesus apparently could see that for what it was. And that leads me to the salt of the matter. In Chef René Redzepi's fascinating television series, Omnivore, he devotes one episode entirely to salt. For those who aren't familiar with the series, Chef René examines eight foods or food-adjacent things that are not only commodities, but which have had a notable effect on human history and development. The others are chili, tuna, pig, corn, rice, coffee, and bananas. In his introduction to the salt episode, Chef René says, "We are salt. It's in us. It's all around us. At any moment, each of us is carrying more than 2 salt shakers of sodium chloride in us. But it's more than biology. It's more than necessity. Dig deeper, and you'll find that the history of salt is the history of us." Following immediately after the Beatitudes, Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot." Now, I've preached on this gospel message before, and here's part of what I said 3 years ago. And this business about salt. Have you ever had to throw out salt because it lost its saltiness? I haven't. Can that even happen? I am a home cook, and I prepare almost all of my meals myself. So imagine my surprise on this past Wednesday when I was preparing a vichyssoise, which is a cold version of a hot potato leek soup. I consulted my Mastering the Art of French Cooking and read this, quote, "Season to taste, oversalting very slightly as salt loses its savor in a cold dish. Chill," unquote. From Saint Julia herself. Like Paul in today's epistle, Deacon Know-It-All does not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom. So take what I say with. In the salt episode, Chef Redzepi goes on to say, you go to a restaurant and the food is under-seasoned. It's the worst thing that can happen to a cook. A guest asking for salt, whoa, that will cause an instant panic. Under-seasoning or under-salting is a culinary mortal sin. Along with salt, Jesus talks about a city built on a hill and a light on a lampstand and not under a bushel basket. These are things that stick out, that catch our attention. With salt, its absence can catch our attention too. Jesus is very clear that we should observe all the commandments, laws, and admonishments of the prophets, every jot and tittle of them. But he also wants us to stick out and not hide away, content in our compliance and complacence. And the church and our interfaith siblings writ large have been anything but complacent or compliant in recent days. The last time I preached here, I referenced some of the protests and vigils that I had attended in response to ICE raids in my neighborhood back in June. The news from the Twin Cities in the last month has been heartbreaking. My friends there are shell-shocked but unbowed. Minneapolis is a little more than a tenth the population of Los Angeles, but the same number of ICE, Border Patrol, and Homeland Security officers were deployed there as were deployed here. That means that it seems ICE is everywhere you go in Minneapolis. Not that the ICE raids aren't still happening here. On my morning walks around Echo Park Lake, I often see flyers taped to light poles reporting new ICE arrests in my neighborhood. The reporting I've been reading and listening to, from podcasts to the New York Times, have all expressed astonishment that much of the organized opposition to the Minnesota ICE raids has been faith-based. Food deliveries to those afraid to leave their homes, escort teams to take and pick up children from school, neighborhood patrols in sub-zero weather to alert folks to the presence of ICE agents are all being organized by local faith communities. This is the church being salt. This is being a light shining before others. This organizing is building a city on a hill that cannot be hid. The people of Minneapolis have resisted to the point of martyrdom, and as horrible as that is, their light is shining over the whole nation and indeed the whole world. Our diocese has been stepping up since June, in fact, before June. Sacred Resistance, CLUE, which is the Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, and the Interfaith Alliance are three groups that I know about. They are all offering trainings in organizing and nonviolence, both in person and online, as well as setting up informational networks that keep all of our communities informed about the latest developments. This is a diaconal moment for all of us. We are all called to witness, stand up, and stick out as much as each of us is able to do. This could be donating money to an organization, attending an online or in-person training, or taking part in a Zoom call with updates on what's going on. And no matter what else you can or can't do, you can always pray and pray often. Take 5 minutes every day to pray for the folks in the Twin Cities, to pray for our neighbors here in Los Angeles, to pray for the softening of the hearts of our Homeland Security, Border Patrol, and ICE agents, that they can come to see all people as children of God and valued members of our communities. This is the time to use everything in our toolboxes to push back and remove the yokes from around the necks of our neighbors. We are salt, and as St. Julia says, salt loses its savor in a cold dish. I have nothing against cold dishes, but maybe this isn't the season for them. But if cold dishes are your preference, remember to oversalt very slightly.